if you suffer from severe anxiety, I mean, the standard advice usually says you should go to a therapist, right?
Yeah.
You sit on a comfortable couch and you just talk through your fears until you feel safe.
Right. That's what we've all been taught.
Yeah, but what if I told you that for millions of people, that exact approach is actively making their brain worse?
It's a terrifying thought,
Well, it
honestly.
really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky, wildly misunderstood, and, just surrounded by culturally ingrained myths.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, and we're going to explore exactly what it is, why it's so debilitating, and most importantly, how a very specific, totally counterintuitive treatment is the only real way out.
And, the disconnect between what society thinks OCD is and the harsh lived reality of the condition, it's doing actual damage.
Yeah.
Because that disconnect, it forces people to suffer in silence. They end up misinterpreting their own minds, often for well over a decade before they ever get the right kind of help.
So, if you are listening to this right now, whether you're just curious about the mechanics of the human mind, or maybe you're trying to support a loved one, or simply wanting to break free from the pop psychology misconceptions that just flood our social media feeds, this conversation is going to completely reframe your understanding of the brain.
It really will.
But before we can look at the solution, we have to define the actual problem. And to do that, I mean, we really have to tear down the neat freak myth.
Oh, the neat freak myth. It is the most pervasive misconception out there, hands down. Society has basically turned a debilitating neurological disorder into like a casual adjective for being organized.
Right, you hear it constantly. Someone aligns their pens on their desk and says, oh, I'm so OCD, or they double check that they locked the front door and they just joke about it.
Exactly. It's treated like a quirk.
Yeah, and treating OCD as a quirky personality trait where someone likes a tidy desk is, I mean, it's like mistaking a raging forest fire for a cozy campfire. It just completely minimizes the destruction taking place in that person's mind.
That's a great way to put it, because when you look at the clinical reality, OCD is comprised of two very distinct, very severe components. You have the obsessions and you have the compulsions.
Okay, so break those down for us.
Sure. So obsessions are not strong preferences or, a desire for neatness. They are intrusive, unwanted thoughts, images, or urges that just suddenly hijack the brain.
Wow.
And they're incredibly graphic, entirely ego-dystonic, which basically means they go against the person's actual values and they cause immense, overwhelming distress.
Right, and then comes the second part of the loop, which are the compulsions.
Yes, exactly.
Because the brain is experiencing this massive spike in anxiety from that intrusive thought, it desperately wants to neutralize the distress. So the person engages in ritualized behaviors or mental acts.
And they feel like they have to do it.
Right. It is essentially, it's like a broken pressure release valve on a steam engine. You feel the pressure building up. That's the obsession. So you pull the release valve, which is the compulsion.
Yeah, that's spot on.
And maybe for one split second, you hear a little hiss of steam and you think, okay, I fixed it. But the valve is fundamentally broken. The pressure never actually goes away.
What's fascinating here is the neurological mechanism behind that broken valve. It's essentially a faulty alarm system. A healthy brain has a smoke detector that goes off when there's a house fire.
Makes sense.
But a brain with OCD has a smoke detector that cannot tell the difference between a house fire and burnt toast.
Oh, wow.
Right. It floods the body with adrenaline and life or death panic over a completely harmless passing thought.
And when you pull that release valve, when you do the compulsion, you aren't just failing to fix the pressure, you are actively making it worse, aren't you?
You are. You are confirming to the brain that the false alarm was real. By answering the alarm with a ritualized behavior, you send a signal back to the amygdala saying, yes, that thought was dangerous. Thank goodness we washed our hands 10 times to survive it.
So you're basically proving the brain right.
Exactly. You reinforce the neural pathway. The compulsion is just a temporary illusion of safety that guarantees the obsession will return.
That is just wild. And because society only focuses on the highly visible compulsions, like, washing hands to avoid germs or arranging things in a straight line, the true varied manifestations of OCD fly completely under the radar.
I really do.
I mean, people are suffering in ways that don't look anything like the stereotype.
Contamination and washing is just one theme. There are several hidden subtypes that are incredibly common, but honestly rarely talked about. For instance, harm OCD.
Let's slow down on this one because for anyone listening who isn't familiar, harm OCD is utterly terrifying for the person experiencing it.
It is
It
paralyzed.
involves having intrusive, violent thoughts about hurting yourself or someone you love, even though you have absolutely zero desire to do so. The obsession is the paralyzing fear that you might snap and lose control. Imagine being terrified of your own mind, terrified to be left alone with your own children because your brain keeps flashing images of you causing them harm.
And the compulsions for harm OCD are often completely invisible.
Yeah.
A person might hide all the knives in their house. Or they might engage in mental compulsions like spending hours mentally reviewing every action they took that day just to prove to themselves they didn't accidentally hurt someone.
Then there is scrupulosity, right? Which revolves around religious or moral perfection.
Yes, that's a huge one.
The obsession is this paralyzing fear of committing a sin, offending God, or just, being an inherently evil person. And the compulsions might involve excessive, rigid praying, confessing minor perceived infractions over and over, or constantly seeking reassurance from religious leaders.
We also see a lot of relationship OCD.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the intrusive thoughts here are entirely focused on a romantic partner. Things like, do I really love them? Do they really love me? What if I am making a huge mistake?
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The sufferer will spend hours mentally reviewing every single interaction, every text message, every feeling they had during a conversation, just trying to find absolute 100% certainty.
And finally, there is just right OCD, which is driven by a profound physical or mental sensation that something is incomplete.
Right. With just right OCD, the compulsion isn't driven by a fear of a catastrophic event, like a fire or a murder. It is driven by the unbearable physical tension of an action not feeling perfectly complete.
Like what?
Well, they might have to tap a door frame until the physical sensation in their fingertip feels even on both sides of their body.
Wait, I'm struggling with this. If our cultural script for OCD is just, washing hands to avoid germs, how does someone suffering from just right or scrupulosity OCD even know they have the disorder?
They usually don't.
Because if my OCD manifests as agonizing over my morals for 6 hours a day or silently reviewing my relationship history to prove I'm in love, I'm not organizing a closet, I'm not washing my hands, I wouldn't even know to ask for an OCD screening. I would just think I was a terrible person or that I was completely losing my mind.
And that misinterpretation is the core tragedy of the disorder. People don't recognize it in themselves. But the key to understanding this condition is realizing that the underlying mechanism, the obsession plus the compulsion, is the exact same across all these subtypes.
So the theme doesn't actually matter.
No, the content of the thought, whether it is germs, religion, violence, or relationship doubt, is entirely irrelevant.
It's just the flavor of the day. The brain just picked a theme that the person cares deeply about.
Precisely. The structure of the disorder is what matters. It is always an unwanted, intrusive thought causing immense distress, followed by a repetitive behavior or mental review designed to escape that distress.
Right.
If you look past the surface behavior, you see the exact same neurological loop of unwanted distress.
And because people don't fit the neat freak stereotype, they don't think they have a treatable condition, which leads directly to a tragic outcome. The clinical data shows that the average delay to appropriate care for OCD exceeds a decade.
More than 10 years of suffering in silence.
Wow.
People build their entire lives around avoiding their triggers. They stop driving. They stop socializing, they quit their jobs, and when the pain finally becomes so unbearable that they do seek help, they run into another massive systemic failure.
Which is.
They are frequently misdiagnosed and mistreated.
And this brings us back to that counterintuitive reality we mentioned at the very beginning. You would think that if you are suffering from severe anxiety, you go see a therapist, you talk about your feelings, the therapist validates you, and you heal.
Right.
But generic talk therapy is actually dangerous for OCD.
It is a trap. It's a trap that many well-meaning, compassionate therapists fall into if they aren't specifically trained in treating this exact neurological loop.
Here's where it gets really interesting, right? Imagine you have a terrifying stray bear that keeps showing up at your back door. You are paralyzed with fear. So you go to a generic talk therapist to, just vent about your fear of the bear. And the therapist says, your fear is completely valid. Let's make you feel safe. Here is some food to throw out the door so the bear will eat it, walk away, and leave you alone.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, mapped onto the brain's neurology, what you are actually doing there is engaging in a compulsion called reassurance seeking.
Right. You throw the food out the door. You might feel better for a split second because the bear walks away to eat. You escaped the anxiety for the afternoon. but you inadvertently guarantee that the problem will come back stronger tomorrow.
Because you just taught the bear that if it shows up and terrifies you, it gets fed.
Exactly. You rewarded the intrusion.
Standard supportive therapy relies heavily on reassurance. A patient comes in and confesses, I have this intrusive thought that I'm going to lose control and hurt my child. A generic talk therapist will naturally try to comfort them.
Which is what you'd expect.
Right. They will say, you are a good person. You would never do that. Look at all the evidence of what a wonderful parent you are.
Which sounds so empathetic. It sounds exactly like what a supportive counselor should do.
But by comforting the patient's avoidance of their fears, and by providing that verbal reassurance, the therapist is actively participating in a compulsion.
Oh, wow.
The therapist is pulling that broken pressure release valve for the patient. Generic supportive therapy validates the idea that the thought was dangerous in the first place and needed to be neutralized. It feeds the bear.
So if generic talk therapy makes it worse, what actually works? How do you starve the bear?
Well, the clinical consensus is overwhelmingly clear on this. The first line, evidence-based gold standard treatment for OCD, is ERP.
ERP, exposure and response prevention.
Yes, it is a highly specialized branch of cognitive behavioral therapy. It is designed to target and break the exact neurological loop we have been discussing.
But how does a therapist actually implement ERP without just terrifying the patient? I mean, if I am terrified of contamination or I am terrified that I'm a violent person, exposing me to those fears sounds absolutely horrifying.
That sounds scary.
How do you calibrate that distress without triggering a massive panic attack that traumatizes them further?
And that is where the clinical precision of an ERP clinician comes in. You aren't thrown into the deep end on day one. The therapist collaborates with the patient to build what is called an exposure hierarchy.
A hierarchy, okay.
It's a ladder. You map out various triggers and rank them by the level of distress they cause, usually on a scale of 1 to 10.
So you start with something that triggers like a 3 or a 4, not a 9?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's take a hypothetical patient with harm OCD who is terrified of kitchen knives. The top of the ladder might be holding a butcher knife while standing next to a family member.
Right.
But the bottom of the ladder, week 1 of therapy, might just be leaving a butter knife out on the kitchen counter while the patient sits across the room in the living room.
Okay, so they expose themselves to the trigger. And then comes the crucial second half, the response prevention.
Right. The patient looks at the butter knife from the other room, they feel their anxiety spike, the false alarm goes off in their brain.
Yeah.
And the therapist coaches them to tolerate that distress without performing their neutralizing compulsion. They do not hide the knife. They do not mentally review their past behavior to prove they are safe. They just sit with the discomfort.
They let the pressure build up in the engine, knowing the valve is broken, and they deliberately choose not to pull the lever. They refuse to feed the bear.
And what happens next is the actual mechanism of healing. It is a biological process called habituation.
Habituation.
Yeah. The brain learns through experience, not through logic. By sitting there and doing nothing, the patient shows the brain, wait, the anxiety spiked, we didn't do the compulsion, and nothing catastrophic happened.
The anxiety eventually peaks and comes down on its own.
Exactly. Over time, through repeated gradual exposures, you are leveraging neuroplasticity.
Right.
You are literally rewiring the brain's alarm system.
Teaching the amygdala that the intrusive thoughts are just junk mail.
Exactly. You don't need to open them, and you certainly don't need to answer them. You are learning to live with uncertainty.
But, you know, understanding ERP is really only half the battle, because the other half is actually finding a qualified professional, which brings us to the specific resources provided in our source material today.
Right, because therapists thoroughly trained in ERP are incredibly rare.
Yeah, if you live outside a major metropolitan area, your odds of finding a specialized clinician within a reasonable driving distance are remarkably slim. And that geographic bottleneck is a massive contributor to that 10-year delay in care we talked about.
It's a huge problem.
If the gold standard treatment exists but you can't access it, it doesn't solve the problem. But when we look at systemic solutions, telehealth models are serving as a critical blueprint.
Oh, absolutely.
The clinical materials we're looking at feature Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC. They are a telehealth practice based in Georgia, and they provide a prime example of how to disrupt these bottlenecks.
This raises an important question about access, because telehealth fundamentally changes the accessibility equation. CHC offers 100% telehealth, ICAPA-compliant therapy across all 159 counties in Georgia.
Which is massive.
It is.
Yeah.
Whether a patient is in downtown Atlanta or some remote rural town on the state line, they have direct access to ERP-trained clinicians.
They also address the complexity of mental health care by offering a diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 licensed therapists.
Right.
That includes licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists. And this is vital because OCD rarely exists in a vacuum, right? And it rarely just affects the individual.
No, it impacts the entire family dynamic.
Wow.
Often family members get pulled into the compulsions.
Yeah.
They start provided the reassurance or they alter their routines to help the person avoid triggers.
Yeah.
So offering family therapy, couples counseling, and teen therapy for anyone 13 and older means clinicians can help the entire family unit stop accommodating the disorder.
It's also worth noting that because OCD often travels alongside other conditions, a proper clinical assessment is paramount. Diagnosis is always made by a licensed clinician at CHC. And besides OCD, their specialties include anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, grief, and relationship issues.
But we have to address the other wall that keeps people from getting help: financial accessibility.
Right, a specialized treatment model is useless if it bankrupts the patient.
Exactly. And this is where the CHC model really tackles the systemic failure. They take a wide range of insurance to make this realistic for people.
Yeah, the numbers here are really encouraging. If you are on Medicaid in Georgia, the copay is $0.
That's incredible.
And for commercial insurance, they are in network with Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. For those plans, the session cost is typically between $10 and $40.
Ensuring that specialized gold standard ERP is no longer restricted by a patient's zip code or their income bracket, that is how you actually start to dismantle that tragic decade of delayed care.
So if you are looking for an example of a clinic doing this right, or, if you are in Georgia and need these resources yourself, you can reach Coping and Healing Counseling at area code 404-832-0102.
That's great.
Again, that's 404-832-0102. You can also explore their treatment models at treattherapy.com or email them at support@treattherapy.com. It is just really empowering to know that concrete solutions exist to fix this broken system.
It really moves the conversation from merely understanding the pathology of a very dark disorder to actively seeing how recovery is possible, measurable, and accessible.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and look at the journey we have been on today. We started by dismantling the culturally accepted neat freak myth.
Right.
We learned that OCD isn't about perfectly aligned pencils. It is a debilitating loop of unwanted, intrusive obsessions and desperate, neutralizing compulsions.
And we explored how that loop hides in plain sight, from a paralyzing fear of harming a loved one, to an obsession with moral perfection, to the unbearable physical tension of things just not feeling right. We saw how these hidden subtypes cause people to suffer in silence, misinterpreting their own brain's false alarms.
We uncovered the incredibly counterintuitive truth that seeking reassurance from a generic talk therapist can actively reinforce the disorder by validating the fear.
Yes.
We learned that to truly starve the bear, you have to use exposure and response prevention. You have to learn to sit with the discomfort, tolerate the anxiety, and refuse to pull that broken pressure release valve. And by doing that, you're leveraging neuroplasticity to literally rewire your brain.
And finally, we look at how telehealth models like CHC are tearing down the geographic and financial walls that keep people from accessing this life-saving treatment, shifting the focus from symptom management to active structural change in the brain.
It's really about taking the power back from those false alarms. As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, sort of building on that concept of avoidance. We learned today that in the context of OCD, generic supportive therapy can actually make the condition worse by inadvertently reinforcing avoidance. The brain learns that discomfort must be escaped.
Right.
But let's take that concept and apply it to everyday life, even for those who don't have OCD. Think about it. How many other areas in our lives, our careers, our relationships, our personal growth, are we secretly making worse by constantly seeking comfort and validation rather than confronting our discomfort head-on?
Oh, wow. That's a powerful point.
Are we feeding the stray bears in our own lives just to get a moment of temporary peace while guaranteeing a bigger problem tomorrow?
Because growth almost always requires us to sit with uncertainty and tolerate distress without running away.
Definitely something to think about the next time you feel the urge to pull the release valve. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep seeking out the facts, keep questioning the pop culture myths, and above all, keep thinking critically about the world and the minds around you. Until next time.